Hi, this is Chase from CNC Commentaries, and today on CNC Movie Breakdowns, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite comedy films, Young Frankenstein. And I am, of course, joined by the Igor to my Dr. Frankenstein. Nando, how are you?
I'm not doing bad. How are you?
I'm doing swell. We uh, we're talking about one of my favorite movies, so I'm excited as always, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts and opinions. This is your first time seeing this.
Yes, it is.
Your first Mel Brooks film, which is craziness to me to even think.
It is. It was quite the experience. That's for sure.
As are most things with you. But yeah, Young Frankenstein, Mel Brooks directed film, came out in 1974. Nando, why don't you give us a little synopsis?
All right. So, Young Frankenstein was released in 1974. It's directed by Mel Brooks, and it follows the story of a doctor, Doctor Frankenstein.
It's Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, excuse me. Um, and he's the great grandson of the original Doctor Frankenstein. And he travels to his grandfather's castle, and he discovers the secret of life, of giving life, and he recreates his grandfather's experiments. And he gets involved in some hijinks along the way. That's for sure.
Of course.
This movie is it's kind of like it's making fun of old monster movies.
Yeah, it's well, obviously it's a parody of the 1930s Universal monster films, the Frankensteins, the Draculas, all that stuff. Just that old horror feel of the 30s and 40s. And we'll talk about it later, but I think one of the things that stands out in this movie is the set design, and they actually reused a lot of the same stuff from the original 1931 Frankenstein. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah. This movie also has a lot of jokes in it. It is quite the comedy.
I mean, it wouldn't be a Mel Brooks film without comedy.
I suppose. All right. So now with that, let's go into our initial thoughts.
I guess I'll start.
All right.
This is I've seen this film countless number of times. It's one of my favorite comedies. I think every time I watch it, I just end up laughing my ass off, and it's so quotable. There's so many memorable lines, and it's just what Mel Brooks is able to do in terms of parodying this style of film, and kind of follow the same type of story and themes of the original Frankenstein, but also parody it and make it its own. And just the way Mel Brooks is able to write scripts, it's like jam-packed with jokes, and some of them not always verbal. He does a lot of visual jokes, which are always fun to pick up on. And this is led by an incredible comedic cast, tour de force. You got Gene Wilder, Marty Feldman, Peter Boyle, Madeline Kahn. So many comedic legends, and it's great.
Yeah. It's certainly interesting. It's certain.
Very eloquently put.
Yes. So why don't we, or my initial thoughts. This is my first time viewing this movie. I wasn't the biggest fan of, Frankenstein and his movie. And, I found that movie to be, boring. But, this movie, it's got some good gags. I like all the performances. So yeah, I had a pleasant time watching this. It definitely made me laugh a couple of times, and it was just pretty good overall.
Further ado, let's
Start
dive on in.
So,
I guess,
the opening of this movie.
yes, very dramatic.
Yeah, we get a long list of credits. Let me tell you. And then we cut to this doctor. And this is gonna be our main character. He's played by Gene Wilder. This is Dr. Frederick Frankenstein.
Yes.
And
don't mess up that pronunciation, or he'll get pretty pretty ticked off.
He gets pretty pissed off when you mess it up. And so he's the grandson of the other Dr. Frankenstein, you know, the one that was a crazy man and brought somebody back to life. And and so he's kind of like, he's teaching a bunch of these students. He's like a professor, and you know, he's teaching them the brain, and he brings in like this little test subject, and these students, like, they keep on referencing his grandfather and his grandfather's work, and he's telling
there's one student in particular who's just very adamant in asking questions about his grandfather's work, and you can tell that he's kind of just trying to forget it and, like, you know, not paying any attention to it and try and be his own, you know, type of scientist, and, you know, have his own, not legacy, but, you know, stand for other stuff than his grandfather, who he says was a quack. And I think this is a good opening scene to be introduced to our main character, and I think it kind of sets the tone, and then
yeah, it does kind of set the tone. But anyway,
I mean, and I guess we should say, you know, this film is shot in black and white, obviously, and it's, you know, just like all the Universal horror films from back in the day. But this film came out in 1974, so, you know, it's nice to have that, you know, it's like it's a nice stylistic choice by Mel Brooks, because I'm sure there were plenty of, you know, creative differences with the studios and actually trying to get it to be in black and white.
yeah.
But the cinematography is actually quite great.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But anyway, so yeah, Dr. Frankenstein and his students are just, he brings in like this man, and he explains the difference between willingly moving your body and things that your body does on its own. And you know, he gives a demonstration, everybody laughs, or everybody claps, sorry. And you know, he seems like a well-rounded scientist. It just,
yeah, he seems very respectable.
Yes. And it's established very early on that he wants to get away from the Frankenstein name due to his grandfather. But alas, that won't last very long.
It won't.
As somebody comes into his classroom and says, "Hey, he's traveled very far lengths to deliver something to our good doctor." And it's basically like, okay, you gotta go check out your grandfather's castle.
Yeah.
And so that's where you know the movie's going to happen. So he travels to his grandfather's castle. But, you know, before he leaves, he says goodbye to his fiancée.
Yeah, we get this, it's like, it's kind of, I mean, it's intentionally awkward, I think. Like, we get this goodbye scene of them, Frederick Frankenstein, he's going on the train, and then, his fiancée, played by Madeline Kahn, is, you know, being all lovey-dovey, and then she's like, oh, you know, he's trying to kiss her, and then she's like, oh, no, not the hair. And then he's got to, like spits out her hair. He's like, and it's just, I think this film does have a lot of great verbal comedic timing and great jokes, but I think this film also is great in terms of like physical humor as well.
Yeah, this film's got a lot of humor in it.
If anything, I think it's probably more physical humor, especially for Peter Boyle, who plays the monster.
Yes. And so he goes to his grandfather's estate, and when he gets there, he's kind of strange. He's greeted by Igor, and Igor's he's kind of a strange individual.
Just a bit.
Yeah, he's the grandson of the original assistant to Dr. Frankenstein. And so, it's kind of like both grandsons are working together just as their grandfathers did.
Yeah.
Which is a neat detail.
It's a nice way to kind of set the plot off into motion.
Yeah.
And Igor's played by the great Marty Feldman, and he is just like, he's so just creepy and weird in this, but also just he's got a lot of great one-liners, and it's just making everyone else around him seem foolish.
Yeah, he's definitely witty.
Yeah, he's quick-witted. I love the little thing about his little hump moving, like swapping sides.
Yeah.
Different scenes.
Yeah, like Igor just does things that are just left unexplained in the movie. Like there's another scene further in the movie when they're trying to resurrect a body for the first time, and Igor just like teleports.
Yeah, I mean it's all for the jokes, and it's like it's not necessarily for like, who cares about continuity? It's for jokes. And
yeah, this movie's not
for the most part. I think they're successful. It's not supposed to be serious.
No, this movie doesn't take itself too seriously, which is a good thing.
I mean, I think you and I even were having a discussion earlier that you kind of brought up. It was like that I never thought of. It was like, when does this movie even take place? We're never told.
Yeah.
Because like in the classroom setting, it seems very much 70s feel, the kind of the looks of the characters, the outfits, the hairstyles and whatnot. But then of course later you get like this old like 1900s, late 1800s medieval Europe feel. And
yeah.
It's just like, when does this actually take place?
You even get that scene of the villagers coming for Frankenstein with pitchforks.
Yeah.
You just never really know. You just gotta guess. But yeah. But he also meets Inga.
Yeah, Inga.
Inga. And it's
kind of by Terry Garr.
Yeah, and Inga, she's quite the character.
Yeah, she's introduced as kind of a research assistant to Frederick, and but in reality, she is, most of the time she's on screen, she is just
making
sexual innuendos, and right from the very start, we see Igor putting in the luggage into this it's a cart,
a hay cart,
and the hay cart, and so she's like, oh, would you like a roll in the hay? And then she's like, roll a roll a roll. And so it's just these quick play on words that Mel Brooks includes in the script that I think are so good.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think you could probably do the same story without her character, cut her out.
Yeah, she's just there to make jokes.
Yeah, but I think like she's intentionally that kind of like I don't want to say sexual, but like just that like lustful character for the doctor.
Yeah.
But also like, yeah, she's got good jokes.
Then we're also introduced to another character.
Oh yes, the classic.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about her, Chance?
Well, I'm kind of scared to say her name, but Igor, Dr. Frankenstein, and Inga all arrive at the castle, and well, before we even get introduced to the new character, one of my favorite lines is, so Igor goes to knock on the door, and there's like these giant, like these are like comically sized like door handle knockers, and then he's like, "Oh, some really big knockers you got," and then Inga's just like, "Oh, I thank you, doctor."
Yep.
So it's just little things like that, or just like they're a nice chuckle.
Mm-hmm. Definitely keeps you engaged.
Yes. So we're introduced to another character who lives at the castle named Frau Blucher. I'm listening to see if there's any horses sounding off.
I would try, but I don't know how to do that noise, so I'll just add it in post.
But yeah, so she's lived at the castle for a long time and was there when his great grandfather was, and we kind of don't really know much about her at this front, but every time her name is said, like we said, horse sound effects go off of horses neighing, and it's this ongoing joke throughout. And just the story behind that is like apparently Frau Blucher, which I'm pronouncing awfully, is apparently close to the German word for glue. Allegedly, I think that's what that means. And so that's like one of those jokes like you wouldn't get on the surface really, unless you were like, I don't know, I guess you spoke German, but it's like that kind of thought that goes into like even jokes with just the names of certain characters.
Yeah, you gotta dig a little deep for these jokes sometimes.
Yeah, and that's why I think this gets better on rewatch even.
Yeah.
Why don't you walk us through these next scenes of going in the castle?
Well, our doctor here is just trying to settle down at his castle. He's got this creepy lady. I'm just gonna call her the horse girl.
I mean, it's a very creepy atmosphere just in general.
Yeah, his castle's like super old.
Yeah, I mean the entire set design is great.
Mm-hmm. And you just kind of get these. She's just showing him up to his room, and he's like, "All right, thank you, goodbye." And then she keeps asking him if he wants something, like, "Oh, would the doctor like some brandy?" He's like, "No, thank you." And he's like, "Would the doctor like some warm milk?" And he's like, "No, thank you." And so, yeah, he's kind of getting frustrated with her, and eventually he just tells her to go away. And everything is good for the doctor until he starts having a nightmare.
Yeah.
He's having a nightmare, and he's speaking aloud because we're not like seeing what's in his nightmare. We're just seeing him freak out in bed.
And I think that's better because it allows to play with the dialogue.
Yeah, you just gotta imagine.
And like from what we hear him saying, we can kind of get the gist of like what's going on, and like because his whole thing is that he doesn't want to become like his great grandfather.
Yeah, and so in his nightmare, he's just repeating that he's not Frankenstein, But eventually, Inga wakes him up, and they start hearing some strange music.
Yeah, they hear some violin in the walls.
They do hear some violin in the walls, and I don't know about you, but I would not want to hear violin in my walls in the dead of night.
That wouldn't particularly please me.
No. And so eventually they investigate, and they're just kind of going around all the walls until they find this little bookshelf that it's kind of like a revolving door. And we get this funny scene of the doctor and Inga trying to figure out how to open the revolving door kind of halfway so they can both get in, and they keep messing up, and then the doctor's like, "Okay, I'll stop the door with my body," and he gets squished.
Yeah, so it's like it's one of those like you pull a book and then the like reveals itself. but it's like going too fast and he can't like go in fully. And like I said, this is just like another example of like one of the great moments of like physical comedy in this movie,
Yeah.
and what Gene Wilder's able to do. And then he's like, pull the lever.
Yeah, it's definitely a product of the time. I don't think this could be pulled off today.
Yeah, that's the thing now. Like nowadays, there aren't really like, I can't really think of anybody honestly who does physical comedy nearly as close as anything like this, or even like Chaplin back in the day.
Yeah, and eventually, uh, they find out how to get past the bookshelf, and they both get past, and they take down, they go down this hallway, and they're following the music, and eventually get to this like really old, almost study-like room. Oh, it is a study.
Yeah, it's well, it's like a secret
library.
Yeah, it's the secret study of Victor Frankenstein.
And so he's in there, and there's this really good shot. It's like a panning shot of a ton of different skulls. There's one that says, what, like 6 months dead, 4 months dead.
It's like 2 years dead, 6 months dead, 4 months dead, and then freshly dead, and then it's just Igor.
Yeah,
with his head
Igor
stuck there.
Like, it's never really explained how he got there. He's just there.
Well, he knows his way around there probably.
Yeah.
And it's just a nice little like jump scare of sorts.
And then Igor's like, "Oh, I'm following the music too." And eventually they keep going, and until they find the actual violin on a table. Yes. They also find like a cigarette that's like it's like still warm, and they find a book on the table.
Yeah, I love how Igor he feels the violin. He's like, "Oh, it's still warm too."
Yeah, that's how he determines that somebody was there. So they open up this book, and in this book is where Dr. Frankenstein's grandfather, he wrote down the secret of how to bring someone back to life.
Yeah, he's just has it all there, laid out in a nice book, ready to read.
Just completely out in the open. First person who walks in there knows.
Yeah.
And so eventually they're like, Dr. Frankenstein, he's like, "Oh, we've got to do it."
Yeah, and you can this is where we like kind of start to see his shift from like being hesitant to partaking in these kinds of experiments to being like, "Okay, let's maybe we'll try it."
He's got to do it for science.
And I think Gene Wilder, he does that shift so well from like scared and not wanting to like,
yeah, he gets really maniacal.
Yeah, he's really good. I think he could have been a really good dramatic actor as well, because I think the best comedic actors can kind of like do the great comedy but also throw in hints of drama.
It's like Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, they discover this book, and they decide they gotta experiment. And so we witness this scene of like a hanging, and then we see like the grave being dug, and Igor and the doctor are just watching, and they get the corpse. And
which this is a beast of a corpse.
Yeah.
Like this is a big person.
It turns out that only really tall people can get like reanimated.
Oh yeah, I mean, kind of before that, like the three of them are like eating, and they're kind of like discussing like how they would have to go about reanimating a corpse, and like this would have to be this size, and you kind of have to like enlarge everything, like scale it up. And
yeah.
Then Inga's like, "Oh, well, that means it's Schnitzel or whatever would be bigger, right?"
Yeah.
And then Frederick's like, "Well, that goes without saying."
Yeah, well, I don't speak a lot of German, but I think everybody knew what she just said.
Oh, that's just the start of many later.
Yeah, it gets a bit strange later on.
Well, it's a nice romantic ending.
Right. But anyway, he's just there, and they get the corpse, and the doctor sends Igor on a very important mission. He's got to get a brain.
Yeah, he's got to go to the local brain deposit.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
there's this funny sign on the door that says brain deposits after 5. Just slip him through the front door. And I don't know about I don't know a lot about brains, but I don't think that's how that works.
I mean, it's just that it's that great like Mel Brooks juxtaposition between like, because like obviously you don't expect to see that in like a sciencey type
Yeah.
place. Like, just it's like the thought of just imagining someone sliding a brain through a door is
Yeah.
it's like it's intentionally absurd.
And so Igor gets in there, and his mission was to retrieve the brain of a scientist, I believe.
Yes.
But he ends up dropping the brain of a scientist, and like it breaks on the floor because brains are delicate. And he he picks up this brain that's like has comically like it has like really funny warning signs on it. Like it even has like a little note: "Do not use this brain," and it's labeled like, abnormal. It's like,
yeah, abnormal, which sets up for one of the one of the great jokes in this movie later.
Yeah,
where he's like, "Oh, this isn't the right brain, is it?" It's like it's an Abby something.
Abby something. All right, and he takes it back, and he doesn't tell the doctor.
I mean, I don't know how literate Igor is, but in his mind, it's probably just another brain. You got a Hans Delbrück's brain. This big scientist guy.
Yeah.
Why would they stick just some random bunk brain next to it?
Yeah, but anyway, then we actually get to the experiment. And,
yeah, we get the big old monster raising scene.
Yeah, they gotta like use a bunch of electricity, a bunch of switches. They got some lightning.
Coils,
Yeah.
I don't like what would he do if there just wasn't lightning for like a few months?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like the Doc Brown scenario. What was he going to do?
They're very convenient lightning. If ever you need a science experiment or anything to revolve on the weather, you'll always get that weather right when you need it.
Yeah. But anyway, so the experiment is successful. At least, it's not successful at first.
It doesn't appear that way.
But yeah, so they do it, and the doctor is like, oh, it didn't work. He's got his little stethoscope there. And he's like beating this monster's chest.
Yeah, he's like punching him, and he's strangling his neck, and he's like, "Work, damn it, work!"
It's basically like 1930s CPR.
You can feel his anger and frustration.
Yeah, but anyway, everybody calms down, and they're eating dinner when they hear a strange noise.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out the monster's living. He's alive. He just took a little bit to wake up.
He's grumbling, and then Frederick mistakes this for Igor finding the meal quite appetizing.
Yeah.
He's like, did you say something to me, Igor?
And he's like, no. And then Inga is also like, I didn't say anything. And the doctor's like, I didn't say anything. And then they all realize the monster, and then they rush off.
Yeah, and then we cut to this other scene of it's a town meeting.
Yeah.
And we're introduced to this Inspector Kemp, played by Kenneth Mars. And what was your first reaction to this guy? Because he is quite the interesting looking character.
Yeah, he's like Inspector Gadget.
In a way.
He's got a really cool arm.
He's Inspector Gadget with the Dr. Claw arm.
Yeah. He's got like this, I don't know, like mechanical arm that like he can only like move it he can only like do one action with it at one time. So he's got to like move it up, down, like all one at a time. And he does this entire process to get a cigar.
Yeah, it's like never explained as to why he's like this. Like it's very robotic and mechanical.
Yeah,
Um,
he's like a really budget Terminator.
Kenneth Mars is the Terminator.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but we see him, like whenever he'll just have the slightest arm movements, and it'll be like nuts and bolts cranking.
Yeah, every time his arm moves, it makes like a mechanical whirring sound.
Yeah. Which maybe he just lost his arm in the war, but
Yeah.
I'd like to think that he's just some police robot hybrid,
Yeah,
like a RoboCop.
he just like showed up one day, and people just accepted him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
And
like
he speaks with a very heavy German accent
yeah.
that like nobody can understand.
He sounds like the Kaiser.
So he'll just have to he'll say something like his very gruff German accent.
Yeah, people
And then
can't
they'll be like,
understand him.
Wait, what'd you say? And
There's
then he'll like drop it.
Yeah. But they're all kind of commenting. The town meetings is about the doctor,
Yeah.
because the townspeople are like, "Hey, remember the other Doctor Frankenstein?
Yeah. Remember that other guy?
He's
Kind of
kind
crazy.
he's kind of spooky, and that guy went to the exact same castle. So some shit's probably going down over there."
Yeah, it's kind of them jumping to conclusions of
Well, they kind of jumped to the right one.
one guy just had one guy ruined the family name for generations.
Yeah, and so eventually, they call on the inspector, and I really like this inspector's introduction, because the person conducting the meeting is like, "There's only one man we can turn to that can judge this situation fairly," and he's like, "The inspector." And then we just get that scene of him doing his with his little robot arm cigar thing.
Yeah, and his little robot arm helps him later with some darts.
Yeah. This robot arm might be a little slow, but by God, is it accurate? Mine.
Kind of like you.
Yeah.
We haven't even mentioned that the monster is played by Peter Boyle, and I don't think we even said that Frau Bluer is played by Cloris Leachman. So just like we said, you have this all-star cast, and then even later there's a great cameo coming up.
Yeah, well, my favorite character in this movie is actually Frankenstein. Not the doctor, the actual, monster.
Yeah, the monster. Yeah, because we could just talk about this now, because it's the whole movie. But I think what Peter Boyle is able to do with just facial expressions and physical stuff.
He doesn't have any spoken lines until the very end. All he has
and even
before
then,
that is just grumbles, and I think he
just,
kills it.
Oh, literally.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's obviously, when you're cast as Frankenstein's monster, there's only so much you can do. But I think with this, since it's a comedy, you can play off that physical comedy quite well. There's an amazing scene that we'll get to, a little routine of sorts. But yeah, he has barely any dialogue, but when he is freaking out and there are these close-ups of his face and his shrieks, it's you can feel the emotion from the monster, which is tough to do.
Yeah.
And you kind of I feel even though he's just speaking in grumbles and moans and shrieks, given the context of the scene, you could kind of infer what he would kind of be saying.
Yeah. And Frankenstein's got some really good jokes in this movie. He's got my favorite joke. He's got that scene with the blind man made me laugh.
Yes, that's one of my favorite scenes. We can talk about that now.
Yeah, so eventually, Frankenstein, he breaks out.
Yeah, well, Frau wants to let him free.
Yes.
She talks about how he's basically misunderstood, and he's actually a very sweet boy.
Yeah, and it turns out that Frau was the one who was playing the violin,
Yes, and she
and
put
and left the book out, and was
yes,
smoking the cigar.
yes.
Oh, we did the thing.
Well, it turns out that Frau Blucher and Victor Frankenstein were boyfriend and girlfriend.
Yup, it was an
Yeah.
inside job.
I mean, why else would this? Like, we're never like really told what her duty is around the castle. So like,
She just kind of hangs out.
I mean, the intentionally creepy, mysterious lady.
Yeah,
But yeah, she wants to let him go. But of course, they're kind of like, you can't just let a creature of this size out into the world.
yeah. But eventually, Frankenstein makes it to like well, we get to see this old man and this old blind man in his house, and he's like praying. He's
Well,
like,
before that, there's a scene with him and a little girl,
oh yeah,
which is like directly lifted, basically from the 1931 film, um, which has Frankenstein meeting a little girl, and I think they play on a seesaw and they like have flowers, and it's just, it's a riff on that.
Frankenstein isn't really that violent to people who don't hurt him. He's kind of a
No,
chill
like,
dude.
he just wants some compassion from others. I mean,
Yeah.
besides his like fear of fire, um, he doesn't like really hate people. I think
No.
all of his stuff are really sprung up from mistreatment of others and just fire. Fire
Yeah.
can be scary. Fire can be scary.
Fire is quite spooky.
Yes.
But then we get this old man praying, this old blind man,
Yes.
and he's praying, and he's asking God to give him some company on his last
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And right
This
as he
is-
finishes praying, Frankenstein he almost like breaks down the door.
Yeah. I
He's-
mean, I don't think he does it intentionally.
No.
He's just overly strong.
Yeah, he
So
doesn't
he
really
just
know how to
freaking
can.
rips the door off.
He's like Lenny from Mice and Men,
Very, very good reference.
and
But this blind man is played by Gene Hackman.
yeah,
And it's just it's such a neat cameo to just think
Ugh.
of. You got this like great actor, Oscar-winning actor, just showing up for this bit part.
he doesn't even come back. He just shows. He just does this joke, and he's never seen again.
Well, I mean, this scene is like there's a scene like this in The Bride of Frankenstein. Of course, this is so many references to both the James Whale's Frankenstein films, and this is kind of like the Bride of Frankenstein meeting the guy in that scene. But this scene is once again so much great physical comedy from Peter Boyle, and
So,
I'm played off well from Gene Hackman as well.
yeah. So this blind man, when he opens the door, and when Frankenstein gets in, he's like, "Oh, that was fast." And then he just sits Frankenstein down for some nice soup.
Yeah, no, not a care like this. You gotta almost feel bad for this guy because,
Yeah, he's got good intentions.
I mean, he's got good intentions, but I mean, like, you can tell he desperately just wants to be with somebody. He doesn't even really care,
Yeah, he wants a friend.
but he just like sits the monster down, offering soup, offering cigars, just looking for a good night. And who knows if there were further intentions for that.
Yeah. So Frankenstein just sits down, and Frankenstein actually looks pretty happy that this guy's gonna give him soup, but he spills the soup all over Frankenstein, and then he tries to give him a little wine. But the old man ends up breaking Frankenstein's wine glass.
Yeah, it like just literally shatters in his hand. Like, I'm surprised the monster didn't even have like a few scraps of like
Yeah,
glass or porcelain or whatever in his hand.
What's this old man doing, dude? That was a pretty hard cheers.
He's been lifting.
Yeah, and then we get the scene where Frankenstein's fear of fire starts. The old man busts out some cigars, and he's trying to teach Frankenstein that fire is good and that fire is our friend. We can use it to light cigars.
Yeah.
And the old man's just trying to show him how to light a cigar. But Frankenstein accidentally lights his finger on fire. He starts yelling.
Like, don't get me wrong. The monster has very enlarged body parts and portions. But I don't know. You'd think just maybe, especially for as long as he's apparently had these cigars, he'd be able to tell the difference between a thumb and a cigar.
Yeah.
The smell difference between a lit cigar and burning flesh, I think, would be quite different.
Yeah. And eventually Frankenstein runs out. When he's running out, he just like slams through the door. He just completely shatters this guy's door.
Yeah.
And
he's got a great end line. It's, "Hey, wait! I was gonna make a espresso."
yeah. Like.
Which I think is like one of the great like closing character lines.
Yeah. That it also ties into like when this movie takes place. Because like it's kind of confusing because the technology is all over the place. They've got trains. I don't know what year espresso was invented, but I don't think they were making espresso in the 1800s. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess well, he probably thinks like, yeah, like what, we just expect this blind guy to just have a random espresso machine.
Yeah. But yeah, so Frankenstein just runs away, and you know what? Now he's just kind of running around. And we should also go into kind of like Frankenstein's. It's almost like his kryptonite. Whenever the violin music is played, he's drawn to it.
Well, yeah, because I mean, while he was being made and while he was chained up, of course, Frau kept playing, and he obviously heard it every night. I guess in a sense it kind of like calms him.
Yeah.
Because Frau is, in a sense, like a mothering type character to him.
Yeah.
Which is weird on a whole nother level.
But we don't pay attention to details.
Yeah, I mean it's just a little creepy.
But his the bad guys use this against him.
Mm-hmm.
Because they start playing the music, and eventually the bad guys capture Frankenstein.
Well, I mean it's kind of sad how you feel bad for the monster.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's the point of every Frankenstein story is you're meant to sympathize in some way with the monster.
Yeah, Frankenstein gets a bad rap. He's not actually a bad guy. He doesn't really hurt anybody.
Yeah, he's not bad. He's just made that way.
Yeah. But anyway, these townspeople freaking hate him. Anyway, they play the music, they draw him, and they nab him. They got him. And Chase, why don't you walk us through what happens next?
Well, we kind of just touched on this briefly, but we get this scene between Igor and Frederick, and he's kind of like, he's kind of confused as to why the monster has been acting like this, and he's like, did you put that brain in there? And Igor's like, no, I put a different brain. He's like, whose brain did you put? And he's like, Abby something, Abby Normal.
Yeah.
And it's such a good play on words. And then he basically is like he tries to strangle Igor. And then they do this whole like charades bit with a sedative.
Yeah.
And that's another great scene where he's like 3 syllables.
Yeah, Inga and Igor are just trying to guess what he's trying to say.
He's like, rhymes with head.
Sedative.
And then after he's done being strangled by the monster, he's like, sedative? What the hell's a sedative?
Nobody knows what a sedative is. Yeah. But anyway, eventually And we get these scenes where the one of the townspeople is like terrorizing Frankenstein with fire.
Yeah, they're basically, average village folk. Like kill the monster.
Yeah. And they're just like they're scaring him with fire because he's terrified of fire. But eventually, Frankenstein gets out, and they manage to kind of bait Frankenstein back, or the doctor manages to bait him back with some music, and eventually he just comes back.
It's all three of them, and it's like
Yeah.
even just the three of them, I don't think would be able to lift him.
No.
I don't know how strong Igor is, but maybe he's lifting too.
I don't know. Maybe Igor's hump isn't like a hump; it's just absolutely muscle because it does like switch around.
Yeah, it just congeals to whatever form he needs.
Yeah, maybe Igor is just like he's just got something supernatural going on. He's just holding out on everybody. I don't know. He can teleport. But anyway. Yeah.
So the doctor, Frederick, gets the monster back, and then he starts on kind of like this path of like reforming the monster and kind of making him more civilized in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like he goes in. He's holding the monster in a cell, and he's kind of like, I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna teach that monster the one thing he hasn't had, love. Because he needs love. And then he's like, well, by any means, don't let me out. And so then he goes in there, and then he thinks he's going to be, like, strangled by the monster, basically. And he's like, let me out, I was joking.
Oh, they don't let him out?
Well, eventually, but,
Yeah, but he just tells the monster, he's like, oh, you've got to be good, you're not bad. No, he just... And the monster doesn't strangle him, doesn't even hurt him.
Yeah.
And eventually, he kind of dresses the monster up, and they go to a... What is it? Like a
it's
science?
Like it's some type of showcase, science, something. It's like a play on like those old like vaudeville performances and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it starts out as like a science expose of sorts.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like showing how the monster can like react to commands.
Yeah,
why don't you walk us through this scene, because it's a great scene.
Yeah, I really like how the scene starts, because the scene starts with just Dr. Frankenstein, and he's just kind of like talking to everybody like he normally would, because this guy is a respected scientist. And everybody, and then eventually he comes out with oh, I figured out how to bring people back. And everybody starts laughing at him, and he's like, "Oh no, watch this!" And he brings the monster out. He brings Frankenstein out, and they do like a little dance and a song and dance.
Well, before that, he's in like they're in like science garb, like not smocks, but white.
Yeah.
And he's basically commanding the monster to like walk forward, walk backwards, and they like the audience is like sort of impressed with this, but not fully. And he's like, well, we can make this a little more stylish and a little more choreographed.
And they break into a song and dance.
Yeah, this is my favorite scene of the movie. I don't know about you, Nando, but they dance and sing, Putting on the Ritz, Irving Berlin, and it's just so great. Like, just like, I don't know how long it could have possibly taken them to do this, but just seeing this scientist and this monster singing Putting on the Ritz and then dancing along, and then you have the monster where obviously he's very limited as to what he could do, so he's just like tapping in place and throwing his cane up. Yeah, it's just so great. It's honestly quite endearing.
Yeah, it shows the monster can be a little human. Yeah, but anyway. This performance doesn't end that well, though.
And a stage light goes.
Yeah, a stage light goes out, and a little fire breaks out. And before the doctor can stamp it out, Frankenstein gets freaked out, And once the doctor stomps out the fire, you know, Frankenstein just can't get back into it. And then, you know, the audience eventually starts throwing things at Frankenstein.
Which only enrages him more.
He doesn't take that very kindly.
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone would if you just started throwing crap at them when they were on the stage.
Yeah, so eventually he, like, freaks out. And what does he do? He, like, tips something over.
Yeah, he's just, like, he's just throwing stuff over, you know, he's
pissed
First
off.
off, he gets scared by, you know, a flame that engulfs. But then these people, you know, they start throwing stuff they think is foolish. And, you know, Froderick even yells at the monster. He's like, "You're embarrassing me, you know, do the bit." And, you know, you can see why the monster gets upset.
Yeah. But eventually, you know, he, like, throws stuff around. He gets pretty upset. And, yeah. After he does this, all the townsfolk get back together, and they decide... Well, first of all, the inspector, with his little robot arm, he tells them, and there's this really good line, he's like, well, riots are dangerous, and we haven't... they're dangerous, and they're chaotic. It's about time we had one.
Yeah.
And so they grab their pitchforks, they grab their flames, they grab a couple of guns, and they decide that they're going to get that monster. And eventually they do. But the doctor... Again. Round 2. But the doctor takes Frankenstein back to his little laboratory, and he decides that he's going to run another experiment.
Yes. Top secret experiment.
Yeah, this is like CIA level experiment. But he decides that he's going to try to transfer his mind.
Yes, he wants to put a, like, I don't know if it's his full mind or if it's just, like, part of his mind, but, you know, he wants to obviously raise the monster's intelligence a bit so he can kind of, like, interact with the citizens.
He basically wants to make the monster more civil.
Yeah. And even though, like, he is uncivil in a way, I don't think it's his fault.
No, he just doesn't. He's just not at that capacity. But anyway, one of the funniest jokes of the movie, the citizens use the inspector's robot hand as the battering ram for the castle. It's really funny because they lift him up, and he assumes, like, the Superman pose. And, you know, he starts counting down in German, and they smash the castle doors open with his metal, like his robot fist. And, they eventually get in, and right as the experiment is about to be complete, the citizens smash the machines.
Yeah.
But it seems to have worked. The monster tells them to all stop, and he seems to have a lot more intelligent thought now. And, yeah.
He starts going off in, like, this, long speech on, you know, how he's been witnessed to people just, you know, calling him a monster, and, you know, just people basically being a jerk to him.
Yeah.
And how he's kind of just, you know, had to deal with this.
Yeah, and eventually...
There's great scene where the inspector goes to shake the monster's arm. Yeah. And then, you know, they shake hands, and then he freaking rips his fake arm off.
Yeah. Like, rips off his little robot arm.
And then he's just like, oh, don't worry about that.
I was surprised to see that, because I had already assumed this guy was indestructible. But anyway, yeah, it's solved peacefully, and the monster is fine. Everybody's fine, and the doctor even, you know, he's fine. But it turns out that the doctor also got a part of Frankenstein. Yeah. So then we kind of.
What could this part be, Nando?
It's it's him being drawn to that music. Yeah. So that would
It's definitely not something else that's alluded to in the bedroom.
yeah, right. um, but anyway, yeah, we kind of get to this scene of the doctor and his fiance, and the monster and his fiance.
Yeah, Madeline Kahn now
Uh,
has been, I don't want to say seduced, but her and the monster are now together, and now she's kind of like pulling off a Bride of Frankenstein look with her hair like that, you
Yeah.
know, the whole
we,
Elsha Lancaster look.
we didn't talk about that one scene earlier in the movie, but there was a scene where the monster came across this woman, and you know it was a bit creepy at first, but you know what?
Hey man, monsters need to love too.
You know, if it works, it works. I'm not gonna judge.
Yeah. I guess you know, and you know, it ends with great Gene Wilder close up.
Yep, and that's young Frankenstein.
Yeah, this movie was nominated for 2 Oscars at the 1975 Academy Awards ceremony. It was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, obviously based on you know, Frankenstein stories, and believe it or not, Best Sound.
Best sound.
Yeah, Best Sound. It lost Best Adapted Screenplay, of course, to The Godfather Part 2.
And, that one's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, it is. But they're on 2 different stratus. Hard to compare the 2.
Yeah, you know, yeah. One of them's The Godfather too, so you know.
And then I don't remember what it lost sound to. But and we don't really need to get into this much right now because I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot in the future. But I just think it's interesting to point out always how in 1974, Mel Brooks was able to make 2 completely, well, not completely different, but 2 different parody spoof films, Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles, and just able to go from one to the other. I think it's great, and just shows how versatile he is with in terms of parody and whatnot. Because they're both, I put them as top tier comedy films. But of course, you'll have to find that out another day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else we didn't really touch on in Young Frankenstein?
No, really. Let's just go into our final thoughts and ratings here.
All right.
I'll go first.
Oh, go ahead.
So you know, this is my first time seeing this movie. I think it was neat. You know, the movie's not taking itself too seriously. I think that's a good thing in this case. But I like the movie a lot. It's got some it's got some knee slappers in it. That's for sure. You know, there's not a lot to say that hasn't already been said. I think it was just really solid all around the board. It's just a fun movie. It's fun to revisit. I bet it'll be even better on a second watch. And I'm gonna give this movie a solid 7.5 out of 10.
Very, very solid indeed. I'm glad you enjoyed your first outing for Mel Brooks, and I'm very sure that it'll be the start of many, because I love Mel Brooks. You know, we didn't even talk about his direction, but you know, it's one thing it's very easy to shoot a comedy quite blandly, I think, but I think he also is he places the camera in a lot of interesting spots. As for me, I've seen this film countless times. This is like a comedy film like I grew up with, basically. I think that it's just what Mel Brooks is able to do with scripts. He's I think one of the funniest people out there. You have all-star performances from Gene Wilder, Marty Feldman, Madeline Kahn, Terry Garr, Cloris Leachman, so many people. So many quotable scenes and just memorable moments. It always puts a joy on my face when I watch it. And I think like I think it's one of those films like you don't have to know necessarily what it's parodying to enjoy it.
Yeah,
Although that
you can just go in without knowing anything about Frankenstein, basically.
well yeah well I think everyone's like even like loosely familiar with the Frankenstein story, but I mean like in terms of like those 1930s Universal films because.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to assume things, Nando, but I would think I'm probably more familiar with those than you.
Yeah, I haven't seen those ones in quite a time. And I haven't
Yeah,
even seen all of them.
yeah. Maybe next Halloween we'll do a little.
Hmm.
I'm jumping to conclusions. But I love this film. It's one of it's I this goes back and forth between another film as my favorite Mel Brooks film. But I would rate this film a 10 out of 10. I love it. I
Oh,
love it so much.
the second 10 out of 10 ever.
Yeah, we're covering some. I just it's the screenplay of this movie is it's near perfect for me. Um, I think the way he is able to change up the Frankenstein story and use it for comedy instead of drama is great.
Yeah, I'd agree
Yeah.
with you. Well, that's gonna be
I
all,
guess
folks.
I guess we should give a little tease for the next episode. Should I do that one?
Knock yourself out.
Oh, okay. We're in for a doozy on this next one.
Oh.
We're going to be talking about a 2005 film. It's based on a graphic novel, if I'm not mistaken. Stars Natalie Portman and Hugo Weaving. It's too bad we're not going to be talking about it in November, but we are going to be talking about V for Vendetta.
This one's one of my favorites.
This is a film I haven't seen in a very long time.
Oh, I'm
And
excited for you to see it
I think
again.
I've only seen it once, so I'm intrigued to revisit it.
Oh, you're gonna have a joy of a time.
We shall see.
Anyway, that's it from us,
Without
everybody.
further ado, goodbye.
Bye, everyone.